Lieutenant
Soldier, you
Colonel
were given
Sarah
direct
Mitchell
orders.
adjusted
Ma'am,
her
I thought it was the
civilian
right call.
clothes one
Your
final
judgment is not
time
part of the
before
equation.
stepping out
Yes,
of her
ma'am.
rental
We
car.
have to move
The
now.
morning sun
It's too
cast long
dangerous.
shadows
We have
across the
our
military
orders.
base
I won't
entrance,
risk it.
and she could already feel the familiar weight of anticipation settling in her chest. After 18 months deployed overseas, she was finally returning to Fort Harrison, though not in the way anyone expected. The base looked smaller than she remembered, though perhaps that was just perspective gained from commanding operations across 3 different countries. Sarah had specifically requested to return without fanfare, wanting to assess the current state of affairs before officially resuming her duties. Her superiors had agreed, curious themselves about reports they'd been receiving regarding discipline and morale issues at the base. She walked through the main gate, showing her temporary visitor credentials to the guard who barely glanced at her identification. In her simple jeans and navy blazer, she looked like any other civilian contractor or family member visiting the base. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. Nothing about her appearance suggested she held one of the highest-ranking positions on the entire installation. The commissary was her first stop. Sarah wanted to observe the day-to-day interactions between personnel, get a feel for the current atmosphere. As she browsed the aisles, she noticed several junior enlisted soldiers shopping with their families. Their conversations were animated and positive, which pleased her. However, she also observed some interactions that concerned her. Near the checkout area, she witnessed a staff sergeant berating a young private for what seemed like a minor issue with his uniform. The sergeant's voice carried across the store, drawing uncomfortable stares from civilian shoppers. Sarah made mental notes, but continued her observation without intervention. She needed to see more before making any judgments. Her next destination was the base exchange, where she planned to grab lunch and continue her reconnaissance. The food court buzzed with activity during the lunch rush. Sarah found a table near the center where she could observe multiple conversations simultaneously. She ordered a simple sandwich and settled in to watch. That's when she first noticed Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson. He sat at a nearby table with 3 other non-commissioned officers, and his voice dominated their conversation. Thompson was a large man, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of presence that demanded attention. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing confident, almost aggressive. These new soldiers don't know what real military discipline looks like, Thompson was saying, gesturing emphatically with his fork. Back in my day, we knew how to show respect to our superiors. These kids today think they can just coast through their service. Sarah found herself listening more intently as Thompson continued his critique of the younger generation of soldiers. His companions nodded along, though she noticed some seemed less enthusiastic about his harsh assessments. One of them, a younger sergeant, tried to offer a more balanced perspective. Some of the new recruits are pretty motivated, Marcus. That Private Johnson in my unit has been working really hard to improve his PT scores. Thompson scoffed. Hard work doesn't mean anything if you don't have the right attitude. These soldiers need to learn their place in the hierarchy. Respect has to be earned, and more importantly, it has to be demanded. Sarah continued eating her sandwich, processing Thompson's words. She'd encountered his type before. Career non-commissioned officers who had become rigid in their thinking, sometimes losing sight of effective leadership in favor of authoritarianism. While discipline was certainly important, the best military leaders knew how to balance firmness with understanding and motivation. After lunch, Sarah decided to visit the base library. She wanted to review some recent policy changes and catch up on administrative updates she'd missed during her deployment. The library was quiet, with only a few soldiers and civilians scattered among the reading areas. As she searched for a particular manual, she overheard a conversation between 2 young soldiers sitting at a nearby table. They were discussing their experiences with various supervisors, and Thompson's name came up repeatedly. The picture they painted was troubling. Sergeant Thompson made me redo my entire barracks room 3 times last week, one of the soldiers whispered. Each time he found something different wrong, but I swear he was just messing with me. He does that to everyone, the other replied. My buddy in Alpha Company says Thompson has it out for anyone who doesn't kiss up to him constantly. He writes people up for the smallest infractions. Sarah frowned as she listened. Arbitrary enforcement of regulations and using military authority to harass subordinates were serious leadership failures. If Thompson was indeed engaging in this behavior, It would need to be addressed quickly and decisively. She spent the rest of the afternoon visiting different areas of the base. At the motor pool, she observed vehicle maintenance operations and was pleased to see efficient, professional work being conducted. The soldiers there seemed well-trained and motivated. However, she also noticed some tension when certain supervisors were present. So, the gym was her final stop of the day. Physical fitness was crucial for military readiness, and Sarah wanted to assess the current state of the fitness program. She changed into workout clothes she'd brought and began a routine on the cardio equipment. The gym was busy with soldiers finishing their duty day workouts. Sarah found herself on a treadmill next to a young female soldier who appeared visibly upset. After a few minutes of internal debate, Sarah decided to engage in conversation. "Rough day?" she asked in a friendly tone. The soldier, whose name tape read Garcia, looked over and nodded. "You could say that. Just dealing with some difficult people at work." "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm Sarah, by the way. I'm new to the area." "Maria Garcia. Are you thinking about working on base?" "Something like that," Sarah replied, not wanting to reveal her true identity yet. "What kind of work do you do here?" Maria explained her role in the supply unit and gradually opened up about her experiences. The story she told was increasingly concerning. Thompson apparently supervised her unit's interactions with the motor pool, and according to Maria, he had been making inappropriate comments about female soldiers and creating a hostile work environment. "He acts like he's the most important person on the entire base," Maria said, frustration evident in her voice. "Always talking about his rank and how everyone needs to show him proper respect. But he doesn't show any respect to us." Sarah maintained her cover while gathering more information. It was becoming clear that Thompson's behavior issues went beyond simple strictness or high standards. If Maria's account was accurate, he was potentially engaging in harassment and abuse of authority. As they finished their workouts, Maria thanked Sarah for listening. "It's nice to talk to someone who actually cares about what's happening to soldiers here. Most people just tell us to deal with it or transfer to another unit." "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect," Sarah replied, "especially people who are serving their country." That evening, Sarah returned to her temporary lodging off base and reviewed her notes from the day. The picture emerging of Sergeant Thompson was troubling but not uncommon in military environments where toxic leadership was allowed to flourish unchecked. She'd seen similar situations during her career and knew how damaging they could be to unit morale and effectiveness. She called her superior, Colonel James Morrison, to provide an initial assessment. "Sir, I'm seeing some concerning patterns in the non-commissioned officer leadership. There appears to be at least one individual who may be engaging in harassment and abuse of authority." "How serious are we talking, Sarah?" Morrison asked. "Serious enough that it could be affecting unit readiness and soldier welfare. I need a few more days to gather concrete evidence before I recommend specific actions." "Understood. Continue your assessment and keep me informed. We can't afford to have toxic leadership undermining our mission effectiveness." After ending the call, Sarah sat on her hotel room balcony looking out at the city lights beyond the base. Tomorrow, she would continue her investigation, but tonight she reflected on the challenges of military leadership. The transition from wartime operations to peacetime garrison duties often revealed different types of problems. Combat deployments had a way of focusing everyone's attention on the mission and survival. Back home, personality conflicts and power struggles could become more prominent. Leaders who had performed adequately under the structure of combat operations sometimes struggled with the more nuanced requirements of garrison leadership. Thompson represented a type she'd encountered before, someone who had likely been an effective soldier in many respects, but had developed problematic attitudes about authority and respect. These individuals often confused fear with respect and intimidation with leadership. They could be highly competent in technical aspects of their jobs while being completely ineffective as leaders and mentors. The challenge would be determining the full extent of Thompson's behavior and whether it could be corrected through counseling and additional training, or whether more serious disciplinary action would be necessary. Sarah believed in giving people opportunities to improve, but she also knew that some individuals were simply unsuited for leadership positions. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the soldiers she'd spoken with during the day. Young people like Maria Garcia had volunteered to serve their country, and deserved better than to be harassed or intimidated by their supervisors. The military strength came from its people, and leaders who undermined that strength through toxic behavior were ultimately undermining national security. She set her alarm for early the next morning. Tomorrow she would continue gathering information, but she also planned to engineer a direct encounter with Sergeant Thompson. She needed to assess his behavior firsthand before making any final recommendations. The conversation would likely be enlightening for both of them, though probably not in ways Thompson would expect. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. Thompson had built his reputation on demanding respect for military hierarchy and proper recognition of rank and authority. Soon, he would have an opportunity to demonstrate those principles in a way he never anticipated. Sarah fell asleep, wondering how he would handle the challenge. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the base early and made her way to the headquarters building. She had arranged to meet with the base administrative staff to review personnel files and incident reports from the past 6 months. Her cover story was that she was a consultant conducting an efficiency review for higher headquarters. The administrative offices buzzed with typical morning activity. Soldiers and civilian employees moved purposefully through the corridors, preparing for another day of military operations. Sarah was pleased to see that most interactions appeared professional and cordial, reinforcing her belief that the problems she was investigating were localized rather than systemic. Captain Rebecca Hayes, the adjutant, met with Sarah in a small conference room. Hayes was a sharp young officer who had been managing personnel issues for the past year. She provided Sarah with sanitized summaries of recent disciplinary actions and personnel complaints, though she was careful to protect specific soldier identities in accordance with privacy regulations. "We've had an uptick in complaints related to harassment and inappropriate use of authority," Hayes explained, sliding a folder across the table. "Most of them seem to involve interactions with the same few supervisors." Sarah reviewed the documents carefully. A pattern emerged quickly. Multiple complaints mentioned encounters with Sergeant First Class Thompson, though his name was redacted in the official summaries. The complaints ranged from verbal harassment to unreasonable work assignments and punitive enforcement of minor regulations. "What's the typical response to these complaints?" Sarah asked. "We conduct preliminary investigations and usually resolve issues through counseling and additional training for the supervisors involved. We try to handle these matters at the lowest level possible." "Have you seen improvement in behavior after the counseling sessions?" Hayes hesitated. "Some improvement, but we continue to receive similar complaints. It's challenging because the supervisors know how to modify their behavior when they know they're being watched." Sarah understood the problem. Toxic leaders often became adept at hiding their worst behavior from official scrutiny, while continuing to harass subordinates when they believed no one was paying attention. This made traditional disciplinary approaches less effective. After the meeting, Sarah decided to visit the supply warehouse where Maria Garcia worked. She wanted to observe Thompson's interaction style in his normal work environment. The warehouse was a large facility that managed equipment and supplies for multiple units across the base. She arrived during the morning shift change, when soldiers were signing in and receiving their daily assignments. From a position near the customer service counter, she could observe the main work area where supervisors briefed their teams. Thompson arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, his uniform pristine and his bearing commanding. Sarah watched as he gathered his team of 6 soldiers for the morning briefing. Initially, his demeanor appeared professional and appropriate. He reviewed the day's priorities, assigned specific tasks, and answered questions about procedures. However, as the briefing continued, Sarah began to notice subtle signs of the problematic behavior she'd heard described. When one soldier asked for clarification about a new regulation, Thompson's response was dismissive and slightly condescending. When another soldier mentioned a potential improvement to their current process, Thompson shut down the suggestion without consideration. "We do things the way we do them because that's what works," Thompson said firmly. "I don't need suggestions from people who haven't proven they can handle basic responsibilities." The soldiers' body language spoke volumes. They maintained appropriate military bearing, but Sarah could see the tension and resignation in their postures. These were people who had learned to keep their heads down and avoid drawing Thompson's attention. After the briefing ended, Sarah approached the customer service counter and requested assistance with a fictional equipment requisition. This gave her a legitimate reason to remain in the area and continue observing. The soldier who helped her was professional and efficient, but she noticed he frequently glanced toward Thompson's office as if expecting interruption or criticism. Around mid-morning, Sarah witnessed the kind of interaction that had prompted her investigation. A young soldier approached Thompson to report a discrepancy in an inventory count. Instead of working through the problem collaboratively, Thompson immediately began questioning the soldier's competence and attention to detail. "How long have you been in the Army, Private?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying across the warehouse floor. 14 months, Sergeant. And in 14 months, you still haven't learned how to count properly? This is basic stuff that any elementary school kid should be able to handle." The private's face reddened with embarrassment, and Sarah could see other soldiers in the area tensing as they listened to the interaction. Thompson continued his criticism for several minutes, making what should have been a simple correction into a public humiliation. Sarah made detailed notes about the incident, including the time, location, and witnesses present. This was exactly the kind of behavior that created toxic work environments and undermined military effectiveness. Good leaders used mistakes as teaching opportunities, not as chances to belittle subordinates in front of their peers. During lunch, Sarah positioned herself in the food court again, hoping to observe more of Thompson's interactions with his peers and subordinates. She didn't have to wait long. Thompson arrived with 2 other sergeants and chose a table near the center of the seating area, where his voice would carry to the maximum number of people. "These young soldiers today have no concept of what real military service looks like," Thompson announced to his companions. "They think the Army owes them something, instead of understanding that they need to earn their place." One of his companions, a staff sergeant Sarah hadn't seen before, offered a different perspective. "I think some of them are pretty motivated, Marcus. My unit has several soldiers who consistently exceed standards." Thompson dismissed this viewpoint immediately. "That's because you're too easy on them, Rodriguez. Soldiers need to know that respect isn't given freely. It has to be demanded. When I walk into a room, everyone should immediately recognize my authority and respond accordingly." Sarah found Thompson's attitude revealing. He seemed to view leadership as primarily about commanding respect and obedience rather than developing and motivating subordinates. This was a fundamental misunderstanding of effective military leadership, which should focus on mission accomplishment and soldier welfare. As Thompson continued holding court, Sarah noticed several junior soldiers entering the food court and immediately altering their routes to avoid passing near his table. This was another telling sign. When subordinates actively avoided their supervisors, it indicated a serious problem with the leadership relationship. After lunch, Sarah decided to visit the base education center. Many soldiers use their off-duty time to pursue college courses or professional development opportunities, and she wanted to see if Thompson's influence extended into these areas as well. The education center was quiet during the afternoon hours, with only a few soldiers working on computer-based courses or meeting with counselors. Sarah struck up a conversation with the education services specialist, explaining that she was researching professional development programs for a potential consulting project. During their conversation, the specialist mentioned some challenges they'd been facing with certain supervisors who didn't support their soldiers' educational goals. While she didn't mention names specifically, the description of the problematic behavior matched Thompson's pattern. Some supervisors seemed to view education as a distraction from military duties, the specialist explained. They'll schedule unnecessary tasks or training during their soldiers' designated study time, or they'll make disparaging comments about soldiers who are pursuing college degrees. "How does that affect the soldiers' success in their programs?" Sarah asked. "It's very damaging. Students who don't have supervisor support are much more likely to drop out or fail their courses. Education is supposed to be one of the benefits of military service, but some soldiers can't take advantage of it because of their work environment." This information added another dimension to Sarah's assessment of Thompson's toxic leadership. Didn't just affect day-to-day work performance. It could undermine soldiers' long-term career development and personal growth opportunities. Late in the afternoon, Sarah visited the base legal office to review policies regarding harassment and inappropriate conduct. She met with the staff judge advocate Major Patricia Collins, who was responsible for providing legal advice on personnel matters. "We've definitely seen an increase in soldiers seeking advice about workplace harassment," Major Collins explained. "Most of them are looking for guidance on how to file complaints or transfer to different units. What kinds of harassment are they reporting?" The typical pattern involves supervisors who use their authority inappropriately, assigning unreasonable workloads, enforcing regulations inconsistently, making personal attacks disguised as professional criticism. It's often difficult to prove because the behavior can be subtle and the supervisors are careful about what they say in front of witnesses. Sarah understood the legal challenges involved in addressing toxic leadership. Military regulations provided clear guidelines about appropriate conduct, but proving violations often required detailed documentation and witness testimony. Soldiers were often reluctant to come forward because they feared retaliation or damage to their careers. Do you think the current policies and procedures are adequate for dealing with these issues? Sarah asked. Major Collins considered the question carefully. The policies themselves are fine, but the implementation can be problematic. We need better training for supervisors about appropriate leadership techniques, and we need to create an environment where soldiers feel safe reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. As the day ended, Sarah reflected on everything she had observed and learned. Thompson's behavior pattern was becoming clear. He was a technically competent, non-commissioned officer who had developed a toxic leadership style that was harmful to his subordinates and ultimately detrimental to mission effectiveness. The challenge now was determining the best approach for addressing the problem. Direct confrontation could be effective, but it needed to be handled carefully to ensure lasting change rather than temporary compliance. Sarah also needed to consider the broader implications of her intervention and how it might affect other personnel decisions. That evening, Sarah called Colonel Morrison again to provide an updated assessment. "Sir, I've confirmed that we have a serious leadership problem. The behavior is systematic and affecting multiple soldiers across several areas of responsibility. What's your recommended course of action?" "I want to arrange a direct encounter tomorrow. I think it's important to assess how this individual responds when confronted with proper authority. That will help determine whether the problem can be corrected through additional training or whether we need to consider reassignment or other disciplinary measures." "Approved. But be careful about how you handle the confrontation. We want to resolve the problem, but we also want to maintain good order and discipline." "Understood, sir. I'll handle it appropriately." After ending the call, Sarah spent time planning her approach for the next day's encounter. She needed to create a situation where Thompson would have an opportunity to demonstrate his attitude toward authority and proper military courtesy. The encounter would need to appear natural and spontaneous while still allowing her to assess his character and leadership potential. She also thought about the broader lessons of the situation. Thompson's case illustrated how toxic leadership could develop gradually over time, often starting with small compromises in standards or attitude that eventually grew into serious problems. The military's hierarchical structure could sometimes enable this type of behavior if senior leaders weren't vigilant about maintaining proper leadership climate. Tomorrow would bring answers to several important questions. How would Thompson react when faced with authority he didn't recognize? Would he demonstrate the respect and courtesy he demanded from his subordinates? And most importantly, was he capable of learning and changing, or had his toxic attitudes become too deeply ingrained to correct? Sarah fell asleep knowing that the next day's events would be crucial for determining not just Thompson's future, but potentially the futures of all the soldiers under his supervision. The confrontation she was planning would test both his character and her own leadership skills in ways neither of them fully anticipated. Sarah arrived at the base earlier than usual the following morning, determined to set the stage for her planned encounter with Sergeant Thompson. She had spent considerable time the previous evening developing a strategy that would allow her to observe Thompson's true character while maintaining plausible cover for her presence on the base. Her first stop was the base commander's office, where she met privately with Colonel David Chen. As the installation commander, Chen needed to be informed about her investigation and the potential confrontation she was planning. The meeting was scheduled before normal duty hours to maintain discretion. "Colonel Mitchell, I've reviewed the preliminary reports from your assessment," Chen said as they sat in his office. "I'm concerned about what you've discovered. The situation is serious, sir, but not irreparable. Today's encounter should help determine the best path forward for addressing the leadership issues." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I want you to know that you have my full support for whatever action you determine is necessary. Toxic leadership has no place in this command. regardless of an individual's technical competence. I appreciate that, sir. I may need to reveal my identity and authority during today's encounter, depending on how it develops. Understood. What kind of support do you need from me? Just continue normal operations. If this situation escalates beyond my ability to handle it directly, I'll contact you immediately. After the meeting with Colonel Chen, Sarah made her way to the post exchange to establish her position for the planned encounter. She had learned from her previous observations that Thompson typically stopped at the PX around mid-morning to purchase coffee and interact with other personnel. This would provide the perfect opportunity for a seemingly spontaneous meeting. She positioned herself near the coffee shop area, dressed again in civilian clothes that gave no indication of her military status or rank. To any observer, she appeared to be just another contractor or family member going about their daily business on the base. As she waited, Sarah reflected on the delicate nature of what she was about to do. Confronting toxic leadership required a careful balance of firmness and fairness. Her goal wasn't to humiliate Thompson or destroy his career, but rather to assess his character and determine whether his behavior could be corrected through appropriate intervention. Around 10:30, Thompson arrived as expected. He was accompanied by 2 junior soldiers who appeared to be running errands for their unit. Sarah observed their interaction as they walked through the PX, noting Thompson's body language and the way he spoke to his subordinates. Even in this casual setting, Thompson maintained his dominating demeanor. He directed the soldiers to specific locations in the store, with sharp, clipped instructions, and seemed impatient when they asked questions about their assignments. Sarah could see the tension in the soldiers' postures as they tried to fulfill their supervisor's expectations while navigating an unfamiliar environment. This was her moment. Sarah approached the coffee counter just as Thompson was ordering his drink, positioning herself directly behind him in line. She waited for the right opportunity to initiate contact, knowing that the encounter needed to appear completely natural. Thompson turned from the counter with his coffee and nearly collided with Sarah, who had deliberately positioned herself in his path. Coffee splashed slightly from his cup, though not enough to cause any real damage. "Hey, watch where you're going," Thompson said sharply, his irritation immediately evident. "I'm so sorry," Sarah replied, maintaining a friendly but slightly confused tone. "I'm still getting used to finding my way around this base. Everything looks so similar." Thompson's expression shifted from irritation to mild condescension. "You're obviously not military," he said, looking her up and down dismissively. "Probably some contractor who doesn't understand how things work around here." "Actually, I do work with the military," Sarah responded calmly. "I'm here conducting some research for higher headquarters. I've been trying to understand how different units operate and what makes them effective." Higher headquarters? Thompson's interest was piqued, though his condescending attitude remained. "What kind of research?" "Leadership effectiveness studies. I'm particularly interested in how experienced non-commissioned officers maintain discipline and develop their soldiers." Thompson's chest visibly swelled with pride at this description. "Well, you've found the right person to talk to. I've been in the Army for 12 years, and I know what it takes to run a tight unit. These young soldiers today need someone who isn't afraid to demand proper standards." Sarah nodded encouragingly. "That's fascinating. I'd love to hear more about your approach. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Sure," Thompson agreed, gesturing toward a table area. "But let me just finish up with these soldiers first." Sarah watched as Thompson turned to address the 2 junior soldiers who had been waiting nearby during the conversation. His demeanor immediately shifted back to the harsh, authoritative tone she had observed previously. "Rodriguez, did you find those requisition forms I told you to get?" "Yes, Sergeant," the soldier replied, holding up a folder. "And Williams, what about the maintenance schedules?" "I have them right here, Sergeant," the second soldier answered quickly. "Good. Now get back to the unit and make sure everything is properly filed before lunch. I don't want to hear about any mistakes or delays." The soldiers departed quickly. Sarah noted their obvious relief as they left the area, another indication of the toxic environment Thompson was creating. "Good soldiers," Thompson said as he sat down across from Sarah. "But they need constant supervision. You can't give them too much independence or they'll start making mistakes." "Interesting approach," Sarah replied neutrally. "How do you balance maintaining standards with developing their confidence and initiative?" Thompson's response revealed much about his leadership philosophy. Confidence comes from knowing your place in the hierarchy and doing your job correctly. Initiative is overrated. Most of these young soldiers don't have enough experience to make good decisions on their own. And how do you ensure they show proper respect for authority? That's easy, Thompson said, leaning back in his chair with obvious satisfaction. You have to establish dominance from the beginning. When I meet new soldiers, I make sure they understand exactly who I am and what my rank means. Respect isn't something you ask for. It's something you demand. Sarah continued asking probing questions, allowing Thompson to reveal more about his attitudes and methods. The picture that emerged was troubling but consistent with her previous observations. Thompson viewed leadership as primarily about control and dominance rather than development and motivation. What about soldiers who struggle with certain tasks or need additional training? Sarah asked. Struggling soldiers are usually just lazy or unmotivated, Thompson replied dismissively. The best way to deal with that is to make it clear that poor performance has consequences. I don't believe in coddling people. The Army isn't supposed to be easy. And if they continue to struggle despite additional pressure, then they probably don't belong in the Army. Not everyone is cut out for military service, and it's better to identify the weak links early rather than waste time trying to fix them. Sarah found Thompson's attitude deeply troubling. Effective military leaders understood that soldier development was a core responsibility, and that different individuals required different approaches to reach their potential. Thompson's one-size-fits-all approach of intimidation and pressure was not only ineffective but potentially harmful to unit morale and readiness. As their conversation continued, Thompson became increasingly comfortable sharing his opinions about military leadership and discipline. He seemed to view Sarah as a sympathetic audience who would appreciate his tough love approach to soldier management. The problem with the modern Army, Thompson continued, is that everyone is too concerned about hurting people's feelings. These soldiers need to understand that the military is about following orders and maintaining discipline, not about making everyone feel good about themselves. Have you ever had any complaints about your leadership style? Sarah asked, carefully maintaining a neutral tone. Thompson's expression darkened slightly. Occasionally, some soldier will try to cause trouble by filing a complaint, but it never amounts to anything. These kids today think they can run to their parents or the chain of command whenever someone challenges them. But good leaders know how to handle those situations. How do you handle them? You document everything. Make sure you follow the rules exactly, and you don't let anyone intimidate you into lowering your standards. I've never had a complaint stick because I know how to do my job properly. Sarah recognized the pattern Thompson was describing. Toxic leaders often became expert at manipulating the system to protect themselves while continuing their harmful behavior. They learned to document their actions carefully while finding subtle ways to retaliate against soldiers who complained. That must require considerable skill, Sarah observed, managing personalities and maintaining discipline while staying within regulations. It does, Thompson agreed, clearly pleased with what he perceived as recognition of his abilities. Most people don't understand how complicated leadership really is. You have to be firm enough to maintain respect, but careful enough to avoid giving ammunition to troublemakers. Speaking of respect, Sarah said, preparing to shift the conversation in a more pointed direction. How important is it for leaders to model the behavior they expect from their subordinates? Extremely important, Thompson replied without hesitation. Soldiers watch everything their leaders do. If you're not living up to the standards you set for others, you lose credibility. And proper military courtesy, showing appropriate respect to senior personnel, absolutely crucial. The entire military system depends on everyone understanding their place in the hierarchy and showing proper deference to those above them. Yeah! Sarah nodded thoughtfully, recognizing that Thompson had just articulated principles that he would soon have an opportunity to demonstrate. That's a very professional attitude. I imagine you're quite particular about ensuring your soldiers follow proper protocols when interacting with officers and senior non-commissioned officers. You bet I am, Thompson said firmly. Nothing irritates me more than seeing a soldier who doesn't know how to properly address their superiors or show appropriate respect for rank and position. And I assume you always model that behavior yourself when dealing with your own superiors? I've been doing this for 12 years. I know exactly how to interact with officers and senior personnel. It's all about understanding the system and knowing your role within it. Sarah smiled slightly. recognizing the irony of Thompson's confident assertions. "That's very impressive. Military courtesy and respect for authority are such important foundations for everything else." "Exactly," Thompson agreed. "Without proper respect for authority, the whole system breaks down. Everyone has to know their place and act accordingly." As their conversation continued, Sarah began preparing for the moment when she would reveal her true identity. Thompson had provided plenty of evidence about his attitudes toward authority and respect, and now it was time to see whether he would live up to the principles he claimed to value so highly. The confrontation she was planning would test not only Thompson's character, but also his understanding of the very concepts he had been discussing so confidently. Sarah suspected that his reaction would reveal the fundamental hypocrisy underlying his toxic leadership style, but she was prepared to give him every opportunity to prove her wrong. The next few minutes would determine not just Thompson's future in the Army, but potentially the futures of all the soldiers who had been suffering under his toxic leadership. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more serious as she prepared to bring their conversation to its crucial turning point. Thompson was still basking in what he perceived as admiration for his leadership philosophy, completely unaware that his comfortable assumptions were about to be shattered. "I have to say, Sergeant Thompson, your insights about military leadership and the importance of respecting authority have been very enlightening," Sarah said, her tone remaining conversational, but carrying a subtle shift that Thompson didn't yet recognize. "I'm glad I could help with your research," Thompson replied, clearly pleased with himself. "It's not often someone takes the time to really understand what effective leadership looks like at the non-commissioned officer level." "Oh, I think I understand it quite well," Sarah said, allowing a slight edge to enter her voice. "In fact, I've had extensive experience with military leadership and the importance of proper military courtesy, which brings me to an interesting question." Thompson's expression began to shift as he detected the change in Sarah's tone, though he still couldn't identify the source of his growing unease. "What kind of question?" Sarah reached into her purse and withdrew a leather wallet, which she placed on the table between them. With deliberate, measured movements, she opened it to reveal her military identification card, ensuring that Thompson could clearly see her name, rank, and photograph. "The question is this, Sergeant Thompson. Given your strong beliefs about showing proper respect to senior personnel, how do you think you should address a lieutenant colonel?" Thompson's face went through a remarkable transformation as the implications of what he was seeing hit him. His confident expression crumbled, replaced first by confusion, then shock, and finally by a pale recognition of the enormous mistake he had just made. His mouth opened slightly, but no words emerged. "You seem surprised," Sarah continued, her voice now carrying the unmistakable tone of command authority. "According to everything you've just told me, recognizing rank and showing appropriate military courtesy should be second nature to an experienced non-commissioned officer like yourself." Thompson's hands began to tremble slightly as he stared at the identification card. Sarah could see him calculating the implications of his situation. Not just the immediate embarrassment of his failure to recognize her authority, but the potential consequences of everything he had revealed during their conversation. "Ma'am, I didn't realize," Thompson stammered, finally finding his voice but struggling to form coherent sentences. "You didn't realize what, exactly?" Sarah asked, closing her wallet but maintaining her steady gaze on Thompson's face. "That you should treat all people with basic respect? That you shouldn't make assumptions about someone's background or status based on their appearance? Or that your own behavior should reflect the standards you claim to demand from your subordinates?" Thompson attempted to stand, clearly recognizing that he should assume the position of attention when addressing a superior officer. But Sarah gestured for him to remain seated. "Don't bother with the military courtesy now, Sergeant. I'm more interested in understanding how someone who talks so confidently about respect and proper behavior could fail so completely to demonstrate those qualities himself." The color had drained completely from Thompson's face. "Ma'am, if I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you would have acted differently?" Sarah interrupted. "That's exactly the problem, Sergeant Thompson. Your courtesy and respect are conditional, based on whether you think someone has authority over you. But you just spent 30 minutes explaining to me how important it is for soldiers to show proper respect to their superiors at all times. Thompson's mouth opened and closed several times as he struggled to find an adequate response. Sarah could see the panic in his eyes as he realized that his behavior had been completely contrary to everything he had claimed to believe about military professionalism. Furthermore, Sarah continued, you've just demonstrated that your understanding of leadership is fundamentally flawed. You told me that respect must be demanded, that soldiers need to know their place in the hierarchy, and that proper military courtesy is crucial for maintaining good order and discipline. Yet when faced with an unknown person, your first instinct was to be dismissive and condescending. Ma'am, please let me explain. Oh, I think you've explained quite enough already, Sarah said firmly. You've revealed that your concept of military bearing and professional behavior is purely situational. You demand respect from your subordinates while showing none to people you perceive as beneath you. Thompson was now visibly sweating. His confident demeanor completely evaporated. Sarah could see him struggling with the realization that everything he had said during their conversation could potentially be used against him in any subsequent investigation or disciplinary action. Let me ask you something else, Sergeant Thompson, Sarah continued. In the past hour, you've criticized young soldiers for lacking proper respect for authority. You've complained about soldiers who file complaints against their leaders. And you've explained your philosophy of demanding immediate obedience and deference. How do you reconcile that with your own behavior toward someone you assumed had no authority over you? That's different, ma'am, Thompson said weakly, though even he seemed to recognize how inadequate his response was. Different how, exactly? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're applying a completely different standard to yourself than you apply to the soldiers under your command. Is that the kind of leadership integrity you think the Army should model? Thompson's attempts at explanation became increasingly desperate as he realized the depth of his predicament. Ma'am, I was just trying to be helpful with your research project. I thought you were a civilian contractor who wanted to understand military operations. And that justified your condescending attitude, your dismissive treatment of someone you perceived as inferior? Sergeant Thompson, you've just demonstrated exactly the kind of toxic behavior that destroys unit cohesion and undermines military effectiveness. Sarah paused, allowing the weight of her words to sink in fully. She could see Thompson beginning to understand that this encounter was not simply an embarrassing mistake, but potentially a career-defining moment that could have serious consequences for his future in the Army. Ma'am, Thompson said, his voice now barely above a whisper. What? What happens now? Sarah studied Thompson's face carefully, looking for any sign of genuine understanding or remorse, rather than simply fear of consequences. What she saw was primarily panic and self-preservation, rather than any real recognition of how his behavior had affected others. What happens now depends largely on you, Sergeant Thompson. This conversation has revealed serious problems with your understanding of leadership, military courtesy, and professional behavior. The question is whether you're capable of recognizing those problems and taking meaningful steps to address them. Yes, ma'am, I can definitely do that, Thompson said quickly, though his eagerness seemed more focused on avoiding punishment than on genuine improvement. Can you? Sarah asked pointedly. Because based on everything I've observed and heard over the past 3 days, your behavior represents a pattern of toxic leadership that has been harmful to the soldiers under your supervision. Fixing that will require more than just promises and good intentions. Thompson's expression showed confusion mixed with fear. 3 days, ma'am? Yes, Sergeant Thompson. I've been conducting an assessment of leadership climate and effectiveness throughout this installation. Your name has come up repeatedly in connection with complaints about harassment, abuse of authority, and inappropriate treatment of subordinates. The realization that Sarah's encounter with him was not accidental, but rather the culmination of a deliberate investigation, hit Thompson like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged as the full implications of his situation became clear. I've observed your interactions with subordinates, Sarah continued. I've spoken with soldiers who have been affected by your leadership style. I've reviewed incident reports and complaint summaries, and now I've had the opportunity to see firsthand how you behave when you think no one is watching who has authority over you. Thompson remained silent, apparently recognizing that anything he said at this point was likely to make his situation worse rather than better. The irony is remarkable. Sarah said, shaking her head slightly. You've built your entire leadership identity around demanding respect for military hierarchy and proper recognition of authority. Yet when given the opportunity to demonstrate those principles yourself, you failed completely. She stood up from the table, and Thompson immediately scrambled to his feet and assumed the position of attention, though his movements were clumsy and his military bearing was undermined by his obvious distress. Sergeant Thompson, you will report to Colonel Chen's office at 1400 hours today. You will bring with you a written summary of this conversation and your analysis of how your behavior has failed to meet the standards you claim to require from your subordinates. Yes, ma'am, Thompson replied, his voice hoarse. You will also prepare a detailed plan for addressing the leadership deficiencies that have been identified, including specific steps you intend to take to improve your treatment of subordinates and your understanding of effective military leadership. Yes, ma'am. Finally, you will be prepared to discuss whether you believe you are suitable for continued service in a leadership position or whether you would prefer to pursue other opportunities that might be better suited to your temperament and capabilities.
Thompson's face went pale again as he realized that his entire military career was now in jeopardy.
Ma'am, please. Sergeant Thompson. Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority and experience. The Army invests considerable resources in developing leaders who can effectively train, mentor, and inspire the next generation of soldiers. Leaders who create toxic environments, who abuse their authority, and who fail to model the standards they claim to enforce are not just ineffective, they are actively harmful to our mission and our people. She picked up her purse and prepared to leave, but turned back for one final observation. You spent our entire conversation talking about the importance of soldiers knowing their place in the hierarchy and showing proper respect to their superiors. I hope you'll spend the next few hours reflecting on what that really means, and whether you're prepared to live up to those standards yourself. As Sarah walked away, Thompson remained at attention, his face a mixture of shock, fear, and dawning recognition of how fundamentally he had misunderstood both his role as a leader and his responsibilities to the soldiers under his command. The encounter had revealed everything Sarah needed to know about Thompson's character and leadership potential. The question now was whether the shock of this confrontation would be sufficient to motivate genuine change, or whether Thompson's toxic attitudes were too deeply ingrained to be corrected through additional training and supervision. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with Colonel Chen to discuss the results of her investigation and her recommendations for addressing the leadership problems she had identified. The conversation with Thompson had provided crucial insights into the mindset that created toxic leadership environments, and those insights would be valuable for developing more effective prevention and intervention strategies. As for Thompson himself, his future would depend on his ability to demonstrate genuine understanding of his failures and commitment to meaningful change. The encounter at the coffee shop had given him an opportunity to model the respect and courtesy he claimed to value, an opportunity he had failed completely. Whether he would learn from that failure or simply find new ways to rationalize his behavior remained to be seen. The soldiers under Thompson's supervision deserved leaders who would develop their potential, respect their dignity, and model the professional standards the Army represented. Sarah was determined to ensure they received nothing less, regardless of what that meant for Thompson's career prospects.